Thank you everyone for joining. I picked this topic, because it relates to our Mamad Har Sinai study of Sefer Shemot. And the shir we didn't get to was Har Sinai and Sefer Devarim. And because it's for the summer, it relates to the holidays. And almost all the stories that we're doing in Devarim in the first couple of weeks is going to overlap with what's happening in Sefer Bamidbar anyhow. That's why next week we'll do the spies. So let me explain the title. I'm assuming the first 5 minutes of the shir you're familiar with, but for those who aren't familiar, I want to go through it. Let me explain the title, why I'm calling it the most misunderstood book of the Bible. So ask almost everyone. Let me share my source sheet. Here we go. It'll be up online to see later on. Okay. What's a classic understanding of Sefer Devarim? Everyone knows it's a farewell speech by Moshe Rabbeinu in the 40th year. But most people assume, what's Moshe Rabbeinu reviewing in his goodbye speech? He's reviewing the first 4 books. And hence the name Mishneh Torah, which means the second teaching. And that's usually how the Greek name Deuteronomy, which I mean it's the second teaching, anonomy I think is the study of, and Deutero means second or repeat. So therefore, what's Moshe Rabbeinu doing? He's repeating the laws of the first 4 books. Just for, let me just stop the share for a second. Just a show of hands, anyone who's online. Who's heard that explanation before? Just raise your hand. It's like classic, isn't it? Ask almost anybody. I've done it with tons of classes. Almost everybody who hasn't studied the book, but who's heard about the book, thinks that Sefer Devarim is a review of the first 4 books of Chumash, and Moshe Rabbeinu is giving his review speech, of course, adding a couple points here and there. But the main thing he's reviewing is the first 4 books. Now, I'm going to take 4 or 5 minutes to prove why that can't be true. This is objective, not subjective. I'm not talking about an interpretation. I'm talking about facts on the ground. For those who have read Sefer Devarim, how many stories in Sefer Bereshit do we find in Sefer Devarim? If I take all of Sefer Bereshit and ask myself, how many stories from Sefer Bereshit, because there aren't any laws in the book, it's all narrative, how many laws of Sefer? There's 0. Not even Yudah and Tamar, not the flood, nothing. Not one story of Bereshit, Yosef and his brothers, all the good things. I think the book mentions our forefathers, but it doesn't tell the story of creation, doesn't tell about the story of the flood, doesn't tell the story about God choosing our forefathers. It mentions that they're chosen, but it doesn't tell their stories at all. No, it mentions the covenant he made with them, but the reader assumes you know what that covenant was. Now, so therefore, Sefer Bereshit for sure not. If I look at Sefer Shemot, the first, I think, 15, 16 chapters, 17 even chapters, the story of Moshe being born, the story of the burning bush, and Moshe being getting his job, the enslavement in Egypt, how it began, the 10 plagues, getting out of Egypt, the first Korban Pesach, splitting of the sea, the monastery, everything. None of that is reviewed in Sefer Devarim. So up until basically, and Yitro for sure isn't mentioned, when he should be mentioned. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. So basically, up until Mamad Har Sinai, up until the story of Mount Sinai in chapter 19, there's almost nothing from Sefer Shemot. So basically all Bereshit in the first half of Shemot is missing. Once we get to Har Sinai, we have the 10 Commandments. That'll be our topic today. We find the 10 Commandments repeated. Almost the same with some small changes, which we'll deal with in a later share. Then we have the laws of Parshat Mishpatim. Not all of them. We have very few of them. A small portion of the laws in Parshat Mishpatim. There's 3 chapters of laws in Sefer Shemot and Parshat Mishpatim. Maybe 10% are repeated in Sefer Devarim and in a different manner. For example, the laws of returning lost items will be in a different format. And again, when they're repeated, they're not repeated identical, which raises a bigger problem. Then after we get Mamad Har Sinai and Parshat Mishpatim, which we have a little bit of, okay. And then the rest of the book about the Mishkan, not a word about the Mishkan in Sefer Devarim. Nothing at all about the Mishkan in Sefer Devarim, and that takes care of Truma Tetzaveh, half of Kitisa, and V'Yaakov Pekudei. What's that leave us with? The story of the golden calf. So there's only 2 stories in Sefer Shemot that we find in Sefer Devarim. The 10 Commandments and the covenant at Har Sinai, which is a very different version than we have in Shemot, and the story of the golden calf, which again will be a slightly different version than we had in Shemot. So basically we're not doing so good. Sefer Vayikra, almost nothing. Nothing about how to bring korbanot, what korbanot we bring. Very, very few laws in Sefer Vayikra are repeated in Sefer Devarim. Again, Sefer Devarim rarely deals with doesn't talk about the Mishkan and doesn't detail korbanot at all. It talks about coming to bringing your sacrifices in the place that God's going to choose, which later will become Yerushalayim. But we almost have nothing from Sefer Vayikra. We have the laws of Shemitah, but a totally different set of laws regarding Shemitah. In fact, in Vayikra, then it's not called Shemitah. In Devarim, it is called Shemitah. But in Devarim, it's Shemitah of money, but it's called Shemitah Kasafim. And in Devarim, in Vayikra, it's laws about not working the land for every 7 years. So even though we have a similar concept of every 7 years, it's not the exact same law at all. Definitely not a repeat and not a review, but rather a different aspect of the law. So again, it's quite clear that Devarim is not a repeat of Breshit, only a little bit of Shemot, almost nothing from Vayikra. That leaves us with Sefer Bamidbar. If you talk about the law sections of Sefer Bamidbar, almost nothing. Nazir, Sota, Chala, Nesachim, Tzitzis, even. But we have laws of Tzitzit, but very different laws in Devarim. Doesn't talk about Tchilit in Devarim at all. Para Aduma, that's mentioned. Compensation for Kohanim is not mentioned the same way. And the Korbanot and Pinchas on the holidays, they're not mentioned. The Tamidim Musafim. And when it comes to stories, we don't have the story of Korach. We mentioned Korach in passing, but doesn't tell the story. We have the story of the spies, but a very different take of that story, which is problematic. We'll deal with that next week. And we have the story of capturing, defeating Sichon and Og, which is way more detailed in Devarim than it was in the original in Sefer Bamidbar. And basically, maybe 5% of Sefer Bamidbar is repeated. So again, that took me 5 minutes, maybe more. Therefore, when it's not, again, that's not commentary. That's simply the facts. It's objective. The book of Devarim does not review neither the stories of the first 4 books nor the laws of the first 4 books. And on top of that, when you read Sefer Devarim, almost all the laws that are going to be repeated are laws that we've never seen before, like the famous Shema, V'ahavta, the Parshot of Shema. We didn't have them before in Chumash. That's not a review. There's numerous laws, the laws about a king, and the laws about Supreme Court and things like that. None of those laws about going to war, none of the laws that we find in Devarim do we have earlier, laws of divorce, the laws of Yibum. None of those laws we had before. So therefore, it can't be a review of the first 4 books because it has laws we never saw before, and the laws of the first 4 books aren't mentioned. Okay, so that proved that was our little introduction. And again, why everyone says that, I'm not sure why. It's just mind-boggling that everyone just says it's a review. The name is misleading. And the rabbis, when they call the book Mishneh Torah, because that's what Chumash calls the book, do not mean it's a review of the Torah. I think the reason is simple why this misunderstanding, because people think the word Torah means Torah. And when we do Hagbah and say V'zot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe, which will be a verse from Sefer Devarim, people think because we do Hagbah and we say that verse, we think the word Torah in Chumash is referring to what we call Torah, the 5 books of Moses. In Chumash itself, the word Torah is not referring to the 5 books of Moses. So because when we say V'zot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe, we think it's referring to the 5 books of Moses, and then when our book is called Mishneh Torah, it sounds like a review of the Torah. I think that's what leads to the misunderstanding. Why we quote that pasuk and where that pasuk comes from will be a share later on. I doubt if we'll get there today. We'll probably have it in 2 weeks. Now, so let me go back to my source sheet and let's get started. That was my introduction, and now we can get started. For those who came on late, you didn't miss anything. So again, it's usually understood a review, and we tested that assumption book by book. Now, I want to give more example about how confusing the book is. Let's read the opening line of the book. I'm going to share here 3 different translations, and pretend you never read the book before. And you read these opening lines. Tell me if you have any idea what the book is about. Usually open up a book, the opening line should give you some idea of what the book is about. Let's read the opening lines and just pay attention to how confusing they are. I'll share my screen with my source. Let's take a look in the good old JPS Bible, okay? I'll look at the English. Eila HaDvarim, let's try and translate. These are the Devarim. What does Devarim mean? Are they words? Are they things? Are they rebuke? There's a big argument among the commentators, but how do you translate the word Devarim? Again, we're going to talk about that in our share later on. But what Devarim is this referring to? A giant argument among the commentators, but the opening reader, when you read this the first time, you have no idea what it's referring to. Well, these are the Devarim that Moshe spoke to all of Israel, Be'ever Yarden. There's an interesting point here we'll deal with later on. This is the narrator of Chumash talking. In other words, Moshe is going to be doing most of the speaking, but the omniscient narrator of the Torah is speaking in the opening lines, and it's clear from here that the omniscient narrator of Chumash, who we assume is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is God, is speaking for the land of Israel, because Moshe is giving a speech on the eastern bank of the Jordan, which we call Transjordan, and it refers to that as Ever Yarden. Moshe Rabbeinu is going to refer to Eretz Canaan as Ever Yarden, but the omniscient narrator of Sefer Devarim refers to the other side of the Jordan as Ever Yarden, which means that Chumash, Sefer Devarim, is speaking from the viewpoint of being in the land of Israel. So again, these are the things, or Devarim, that Moshe spoke to Israel in Ever Yarden, that's in Jordan, on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. And then in the Bimar, what Midbar is that? In the Arava, not sure what that is, between opposite Suf, between Paran and Tofel, and Lavan and Chatzerot and Dizahav. These are all places we never heard of before. And there's a giant argument. Is this one place, as Rashbam will explain, and we're giving sort of Israeli instructions of where this place is, getting very detailed coordinates, exactly where the speech is being given? Or is this many places, as Ramban and Ibn Ezra will say, is this referring to many places that Moshe Rabbeinu gave his speech? We'll deal with that share later on. Pasuk Bet is the most confusing. First of all, Pasuk Bet is not a verse. It doesn't fit by any means or standards. It's not a sentence. Achadasar yomi chorev, derachar seir ad Kadesh Barnea. There's no verb, there's no topic. 11 days from Chorev, which is Mount Sinai, by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Look at the translation. It is 11 days journey from Chorev unto Kadesh Barnea by the way of Mount Seir. What does that have to do with anything? That pasuk, that verse is just dangling there, isn't it? If it wasn't there, you wouldn't know it's missing. What does it add? What does it take away? I hope you all agree with me that verse 2, if verse 1 is confusing, verse 2 is even more confusing. I'll just show you another translation. This is in Ala Torah. I'm not sure what he's using from. These are the words, again, that Moses spoke to all of Israel beyond the Jordan. I know beyond, but on the other side of the Jordan, in the wilderness, in the Aravam, over Suf. It's not clear whether it's one place or many places. And also in verse 2, it is 11 days journey from Chorev by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Let's check the Chabad Tanakh. What's it say here? These words Moshe spoke to all of Israel. Pretty much the same. And again, it is 11 days journey. It puts it in quotation marks for some reason. It's 11 days journey from Chorev by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. So I have in front of me, let me stop my share for a second. I have in front of me this Living Torah by Aryeh Kaplan. He says as follows. He adds a phrase here. He says, this is in the area. He puts in parentheses. This is in the area, which is an 11-day journey from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea by way of. He says that it's also part of the description of where this one place is. But you realize the opening line is super, super confusing. We're not going to solve that yet. I just want to use that as an introduction to show you that this is a book that when you read it the first time, you have no idea what's going on. What I want to show you today, the only way to understand the book is to read it first, and then you have to read it again. Almost like I'll give a bad analogy. Anyone who's read Harry Potter, I'm sure most of you have because your grandchildren did. So the first time you read Harry Potter, if it wasn't for the fact you heard how good a book it was, you would have given up after the first chapter because you have no idea what's going on. Yeah, what's this? You have no idea what's going on. You're totally lost. Now, you only understand what's going on after you read the book. Then if you read the first chapter after you've read the book, it's awesome. Like, it's amazing how good it is. And it's not a poorly written book. Again, lahavdil elef havdalot, as they say. Lahavdil. I'm not comparing chas v'shalom. But hands down, our kids like Harry Potter better than they like Chumash. Ask any teacher. But I'm just showing you when the opening line of a book is confusing and unclear, that doesn't mean the book's poorly written. That means the book is up to something. And what I want to sort of share with you is that because this book needs constant repetition, as we'll see, the Torah is begging us to read this book over and over again. You can only understand the book when you read it over and over again. That's my own 2 cents I want to add. I'll try to prove that today. Okay. Now, Now, let's go back to our source sheet here. Let me check the chat real fast. I have lots of comments there. Okay, Chabad's claiming that it's 11 days. Chabad is claiming that the 11 days pasuk is the Devarim. Oh, that's a good point. Didn't realize. Which really makes content. Okay, I'm not sure what that means though. I'm not sure how that adds, but we'll follow. I'll explain the Ebenezer. We think has the best explanation of the first two psukim. But again, we won't understand Ebenezer's explanation until we read chapter 5. Very good. I'm assuming the omniscient narrator is God for sure. Oh, wait, why should I assume that? I'm sorry. That's a question in general about Chumash. But Chumash has an omniscient narrator ever from day zero, from day one. Who wrote Chumash? That's a different topic. That's for Josh Berman and I know there is a God. God gave us the Bible. How he gave it, in my opinion, is not really that important. No, it's the Torah is from God. How he wrote it and how he got it, that's an interesting topic, but that doesn't take away from its holiness and study. We study it, it's from God, and we study it. Now, let's get to work on back to our screen. Okay, so the books are confusing. And what does Devarim mean? Are they words? Are they laws? Are they rebuke? Are they things? Again, every parshan goes in a different direction. Now, to answer the question, what is Devarim? I want to give a review of what the other books are and see how Devarim fits in. So I'll give a real quick review of the key points of Chumash. Keep the way I understand. Sefer Bereshit is pretty much how and why God chooses a nation. The topic is not just creation. The topic is God choosing a nation. The first 11 chapters are going to be the platform and the background to understand why he chooses a nation. But in my opinion, Sefer Bereshit is a book written for Am Yisrael to understand how and why God brought them down to Egypt, took them out of Egypt, and why they're entering a brit at Har Sinai. Sefer Shemot is the story of becoming that nation. Again, in Bereshit, there's going to be a covenant between God and our forefathers. It becomes to fruition in Sefer Shemot. We enter a covenant to become God's people at Har Sinai, and the Mishkan is the eternal symbol of the covenant. But if we study Sefer Shemot in detail, we see Sefer Shemot is primarily, the courtship of the Jewish people, bringing them to Mount Sinai, entering a covenant, and reestablishing the covenant after breaking it, and the symbol of the covenant. The book ends with the Mishkan, the symbol of the covenant, and then Vayikra is how to use the Mishkan and when to use the Mishkan and how the Mishkan affects our day-to-day behavior. But Midbar is should have been the book of how we go to the land of Israel. It then becomes how and why the first generation failed, and how the new generation gets ready for conquest. And that leaves us what is Sefer Devarim, and we proved it's not a review of the first 4 books. Now we see what it is. The next title, which was the alternate title for this year, Devarim is not only the most misunderstood book, it's the most important book of Chumash. And I want to prove that today, hands down. If I had to pick what book is most important at a practical level, it's Sefer Devarim, hands down, over all the other books. And I'll try to explain why. Okay, now let's get to Roman numeral 2. What would be the logical approach to understand what the book is about? Simply to read the book. But that's too much to expect from people. That's number 1. Number 2, it's a problem. One of the other problems of Sefer Devarim is it's during summer vacation. So by the time we start the book, it's Tisha B'Av time, and everyone's on vacation. There's no school. By the time summer vacation is over, it's September. It's already a couple of days, if not a couple of weeks before Rosh Hashanah, and we're studying, getting ready for the Chagim. And then we only start studying Chumash after Simchas Torah when we started Sefer Bereshit. So because of summer vacation and our school year and our holiday schedule, Sefer Devarim always gets the back seat. And of course, everyone assumes it's a review, so no one reads the book. So maybe that's one explanation. What we're going to do is we're going to cheat, okay? And I'm going to make one observation, which is key. And then I'm going to read chapter 5. Let me explain why. Again, if you were my students in a regular class, I'd make you find this on your own, find each speech, but I'll just give our conclusion. There are several key speeches in Sefer Devarim, but there's a main speech that goes from chapter 5 to 26. We're going to identify that speech today. Only after you understand what the main speech is from chapter 5 to 26, then you understand that the first speech from chapter 1 to 4 is introductory, and everything that happens afterwards relates to that main speech or be a covenant about the laws of the main speech. So to understand the book, before I can read the first 4 chapters, especially the opening line, I need to read the main part of the main speech, chapters 5 to 26, to understand why the first speech is an introduction to it. And then after I've read the main speech, I can understand everything that follows. So what we're going to do in today's class is we're going to read the introduction to the main speech to find out what the book is about, which I think is a logical way to understand it. Again, theoretically, we should read the whole book from the beginning and be confused, but we're going to cheat and we're going to start with chapter 5 because if you've studied the book, you know that's the first speech. So here's what we're going to do. I'm purposely only doing the Hebrew. You can follow with an English Hebrew. The Hebrew is very easy. I simply want to use the Hebrew because it's easier to see everything, keywords, and I'll translate as we go through. Okay. So again, the first half of the first pasuk of chapter 5 again is the omniscient narrator of Chumash speaking. Vayikra Moshe al kol Yisrael v'yomer lehem. Moshe called all of Israel together and told them. Here we need a quotation mark. Right. Israel. Moshe begins talking right here in this line. Shema Yisrael chukim mishpatim. Moshe Rabbeinu's opening line is, listen to these laws. And again, you can check it one time if you're bored. If you read the book, starting now, in the middle of verse 1 of chapter 5, Moshe does not stop talking until the end of chapter 26. That's super important to pay attention to, because if you don't realize that, you won't realize what the speech is about. But again, if you want for homework, check it out. Start reading from chapter 1 and see if you can find any break. The narrator never comes back until chapter 27. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu is speaking in first person from the middle of verse 1 in chapter 1 to the end of chapter 20 in chapter 5 to the end of chapter 26. And that's why it's called the main speech. The Chazal referred to it as Num HaMitzvot because it's mostly about commandments, but it's one long speech. And like any good speech writer, Moshe Rabbeinu has to begin a speech with explaining what the speech is going to be about. So let's read the opening line of the speech and try to understand how the opening line of the speech can appreciate what the speech is about and hence what the book is about. So what's the opening line? He says, listen up, O Israel. Listen to the chukim and mishpatim. Remember that phrase? We're not going to translate it. Chukim might be statutes, mishpatim are laws. What specific laws it's referring to, we'll discuss as we continue our study. But the main thing is, Moshe tells the people, first of all, to wake up, to listen to Shema Yisrael, to these chukim and mishpatim. And from now on, I'm just going to say chukim mishpatim. This phrase is going to repeat itself probably not 100 times, but probably 20, 30 times in the book. The main speech is referred to as chukim and mishpatim. Asher onochi dover bosnechem hayom. Now, Moshe refers to himself as onochi, which I think is significant because onochi, even though he's speaking on behalf of God. But onochi is a much more emphatic ani. He didn't say asher ani, asher onochi dover bosnechem hayom. Just like onochi Hashem Elokecha is a more emphatic of ani than I, but like I myself, I am speaking to you. So because Moshe is speaking with you on behalf of God, so he'll refer to himself as Anochi, Dover Bosnechem Hayom. Notice the word Osnechem in your ears. And the next phrase I think is probably the most important for Torah in motion. You'll see why in a minute. Ulamaretem otam ushmartem lasotam. Moshe tells the people, these laws I'm about to teach you, these laws do not only have to be kept, you have to study the laws and keep the laws. Meaning, Jewish law, especially laws of Sefer Devarim, it's not enough to keep them, they have to be studied. And therefore, in Judaism, we don't only keep laws, we study laws. And part of keeping the laws is the study of the laws. There's what's called Talmud Torah or Limud Torah is going to be key to being Jewish, especially keeping the laws of Sefer Devarim. They require study because you have to study laws. There are going to be principles that are going to be applied all through Torah Sheba'al Peh. So again, these laws, you don't only have to learn them and keep them, you have to study them as well. You have to learn them and keep them. And we'll see later on, you have to teach them to your children. Okay. Now, after that opening line, I would expect Moshe to begin teaching the laws. But before he teaches the laws, remember, Moshe is speaking to the people in the 40th year of month before his death. He's going to give them a speech about reviewing all these laws. But first he has to explain under what authority is he teaching these laws. And therefore, what's the next line? Hashem Elokeinu karati manu brit b'chorev. You'll see how important this pasuk will be later on. Okay, Hashem our God, which I'm going to explain later on, means Hashem our boss. Not Hashem is our God and no one else's God, but rather Hashem, who is our boss. Okay? Hashem that I'm referring to all through this speech, our God, he made a covenant with us at Har Sinai. Now, I'm making a big deal about this phrase because in a chapter from now, in fact, I'll just jump all the way to the end. In chapter 6, we're going to have a famous line called Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I'm sure you've seen that line before in our Shema. I want to prove to you that when Moshe says in verse 4 in chapter 6, when Moshe wakes them up again, he says Shema Yisrael. Remember, he begins his speech with Shema Yisrael. His introduction finishes in the verse beforehand. And now he picks up the speech again with the laws. He reintroduces the speech, gets the people's attention, and says, the same Hashem Elokeinu, who made a brit with us at Har Sinai, that's our covenantal partner, the God who made a covenant with Hashem, our boss, right? Who is he? He's not only our God, he's everyone's God. In that sense, when we say the Shema, it's a pledge of allegiance, not a statement of faith. I think we've talked about that before, that when you say the Shema, which is what we say here, I can't really understand the first verse of Shema if I don't understand its context in Sefer Devarim. And Hashem Elokeinu that Moshe is referring to in chapter 6 is Hashem Elokeinu asher karati manu brit b'chorev. The God who made a covenant with us at Har Sinai, he's everyone's God. He's the one and only God, and we're chosen to serve him. So again, Moshe's opening statement, he's saying that the laws that I'm about to teach you, they're part of a covenantal commitment that you made at Mount Sinai in Chorev. What would people say 40 years later? That wasn't us, that was our parents. Moshe has to negate that misunderstanding. He says, Lo et avotenu. Almost all the commentators say it wasn't only with our fathers. That brit was not only made with one generation, that brit was made for all generations. And therefore, it wasn't only with your parents. That covenant, even though it happened 40 years ago or 39 years ago, it was made with you as well. That wasn't only with your parents, it was with you. In fact, even more so you, because that covenant was becoming a nation in the land, as we'll see. And you're going to fulfill the covenant more than they. Notice they never fulfilled that covenant. What was it about, as we'll see? But you're going to be the nation, the people who are going to fulfill that covenant. So we'll see in a minute that Moshe in chapter 4 is going to talk about this more in detail. All of you who are alive here today, right? This covenant not only is for you, you're going to be the people who are going to fulfill it. Let me explain to you why I'm making a big deal about this. We're going to study chapter 4 later on. Probably not, we won't get there today. If I go back to, let me stop the share for a minute. If I go back to chapter 4, which is going to be Moshe Rabbeinu's, no, we want this one, we want this Tanakh. If I go back to chapter 4 and Moshe Rabbeinu's introductory speech, which is chapter 4 is the end of his speech. Listen how chapter 4 begins. V'ata Yisrael, this is introductory. Shema el chukim ve'el mishpatim. Moshe loves the word Shema in this speech, in case you didn't realize. Because listen to these chukim mishpatim, asher onochim elamed etchem. He's referring to the first line of chapter 5 coming up. To keep them in order to be worthy of coming and conquering the land. In other words, keep these laws. If you keep the laws, God will help you conquer the land. Then Moshe says, it's a package deal. Don't add on, don't take off, lo tosif. And then he says as follows. He's speaking again to the survivors of the desert, those who survived the whole desert experience. It's a month before he dies. You all saw what happened to Balpor. Anyone who sinned, all the males, all the men who followed Balpor, they were destroyed by that terrible plague. Therefore, it pays to listen to God. Vatem, you, the survivors, hadvekim b'Hashem Elokechem. Those who remained loyal to God and didn't sin with Balpor, Chaim Kochem Hayom, you survived the desert. You are going to receive the challenge to conquer the land of Israel and establish the nation. And these laws are for you. Basically, Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, you've done a good job so far. You survived the desert. Keep up the good work and don't mess up. And then he continued, Ray, understand, I'm teaching you Chukim Mishpatim. And again, we'll return to these psukim later on after we read the main speech, or the introduction to the main speech. But remember, I told you the word Chukim Mishpatim is going to be repeated over and over again. We had it here, we had it in the beginning. But chapter 4 is the introduction to chapter 5. Now we have to go back and see chapter 5. So again, let me just review what we did. And then soon you'll see how important this is. We're reading chapter 5, the speech in chapter 5 to understand what the book is about. The main speech goes from chapter 5 to 26. What that speech is about, Moshe Rabbeinu is going to introduce in chapter 5. He says the laws of the speech, which will be from chapter 6 to 26, to begin with the famous Shema, with Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. These laws are part of a covenant that God made with you at Har Sinai. It wasn't only with your parents, it was with you, especially you who survived this, because you're going to fulfill it. Then he's going to say, you know what? God spoke to you, panim panim. The actual covenant was made directly between you and God. God spoke to you directly these words from the fire. But Anochi omeid ben Hashem u'benechem, I was the middleman between you and God at that time to tell you the words of God. Like Hashem. Why? You were afraid of the fire, and Moshe will explain the story very shortly. And we'll see very soon how this little detail is going to be key to the book. Why does Moshe mention the fact that at Har Sinai, God wanted to speak to you directly, but you got scared, and you asked me to be the middleman? I'm purposely skipping now the 10 Commandments. But why does Moshe quote the 10 Commandments? Not part of an historical speech and review, but rather because he mentioned that the laws of the 10 Commandments, because the laws of Sefer Devarim are part of a brit that God made with us at Har Sinai, he's going to quote the terms of the covenant, which we call Aseret HaDibrot. So therefore, Moshe quotes the 10 Commandments as part of his introduction. Why they're different and what the reason for the difference is, we're going to dedicate a whole shir to that later on when we get to Parshat Etchanan. In the meantime, we're going to pick up the story. Now, in your Tanachim, you might have a different numbering of the verses because how many verses are in the 10 Commandments depends on how you divide them up. So in the Tanakh I'm using, it's verse 18, and most Tanachim is verse 19. So don't let that confuse you if you're following in a different Chumash. Again, it's verse 18, and some Chumashim it's verse 19. Remember, the division of Chumash into Psukim is based on the Tamei Mikra. And the Tamei Mikra for the 10 Commandments, the cantillation notes, there's different versions of them, and therefore how we number the verses is going to depend on that. I'll just read verse 18 quickly. These Divarim, which clearly is referring to what we call the 10 Commandments. These Divarim, God spoke to the entire nation from the mountain, from the fire, okay? And he wrote them on the 2 tablets and gave them to me. I'll leave that as background. Moshe is going to deal with this in detail in Parshat Ekev. Now starts the key story. Verse 19. Moshe is going to tell a story now about why Moshe is teaching the laws and they're not hearing them from God directly. He says, when you heard the voice of God coming from the darkness and the mountain was full of fire, all your elders, all your leaders, basically everyone got together and came to me and complained. What did you say? V'tomeru, Hey neranu Hashem Eloheinu et kvodo v'et godlo, et kolo shamanu mitoch ha'esh. As Moshe, God showed us His greatness, His glory. We heard His voice from the fire. Hayom hazeh ra'inu ki yedaber Elohim et adam b'chai. Moshe, we're believers. As we believe in God, we see that God can speak to man and stay alive. It's possible, but lama namut im tochlenu eish hagdola hazot. Another minute in Har Sinai, another day in Har Sinai, we can't survive. Because we survived the theophany, we survived, the 10 Commandments, but that was enough. We can't possibly, we mortals can't possibly remain at this level any longer. If we continue hearing God speak to us, we're all going to die. The people basically cannot take this intense connection to God. And they explain why, because what mortal says it's not a human, it's simply not human to be able to be so close to God and communicate with God. It's not for the average human being. Moshe Rabbeinu, maybe you can do it, but we can't. Now listen carefully to what they suggest to Moshe Rabbeinu. Pasuk Gimel. Krava Taushma. Moshe, you know what? You go and talk to God. You're Moshe Rabbeinu. You're different. You're superhuman. You go and listen. Et kol asher yomar Hashem Eloheinu. Notice again, Hashem Eloheinu. This phrase, Hashem Eloheinu, is the Hashem Eloheinu of the Shema and of the opening line. Hashem Eloheinu kratim anu brit b'chorev. Hashem, our boss. We made this covenant at Har Sinai with God. So he says, you go and listen to our boss. And everything Hashem, our boss, will say. Notice Nasa v'nishma, now it's in the right order. V'shamanu v'asinu, that's why Chazal say, we should say nishma v'naseh. And actually, that's what we tell Moshe Rabbeinu. What do they tell Moshe Rabbeinu? We're going to do Nasa v'nishma, or nishma v'naseh, to everything you say in the name of God. And we're going to treat you, anything that you say in God's name, is as though we heard it from God directly. We're convinced by Mamad Har Sinai, we're convinced, but now we want to hear the laws from you and not from God. And we'll see in a minute, God likes this. He says, this is exactly what I wanted. Now, remember the Rambam's principle about Nevuat Moshe. These psukim are key in the Rambam's principle about what we believe in. Believing in Moshe as a prophet is not a belief in Moshe Rabbeinu as a person, but rather a belief that when Moshe says, God told me something, he really heard it from God and he didn't make it up. The biggest problem in Emunah is that, if a rabbi comes and tells us a law, so I can believe in God, I can believe that God chose us as a nation and God, entered a covenant with us, but the detailed laws, if God said it, I keep it. If the rabbis made it up, we pick and choose. I call that my bad definition of modern orthodoxy, which is only a joke. But what I'm getting at is that when we hear laws from Moshe Rabbeinu, we need a certain level of certainty that Moshe Rabbeinu did not make up the laws, but rather the laws that Moshe is teaching us are directly from God. And that's Moshe's key point in his opening speech. The laws I'm about to teach you are laws that God gave me to teach you, and it was your idea to hear them from me. God would have been happy to teach you, but you begged me to be the middleman, and I would get the laws and teach them, and you agreed to accept them, as though God gave them to you. Now, God is happy with this new setup. God heard, your voice, what you said when you spoke to me. God told me I heard what the people were saying. Right? Their attitude, it actually is a very good one. He explains why. Meeting in modern day Hebrew halavai. Wouldn't it be great? They should always fear me so much. So it's this awe and fear of God is critical in keeping God's laws. And this level of yirat shamayim, of awe of heaven, not fear of being scared, but fear of awe and distance, because out of respect of God, they should always have so much awe and fear of God, which will lead them lishmar kol mitzvotai kol hayamim, l'mani yitab lehem livnim le'olam. This would be good for their existence. It would be good for the keeping the laws. I'll just give you one real quick example about this idea of fear at Har Sinai. If you remember the last law of Sefer Devarim, we'll see later on in chapter 31, every 7 years we're going to relive this whole experience of Hakel. And sure enough, what's going to be the purpose of Hakel? Moshe tells the people every 7 years, Hakel ta'am, everyone gathers together. Hakel ta'am anashim anashim ba'ataf. We're in chapter 31. Why? L'man yishma'u u'leman yamadu v'yaru et Hashem aleichem. These are all the things of Sefer Devarim, so that they listen and they learn and they fear Hashem, their God. Keep all the words of this Torah. We'll see the word Torah is referring to the laws of the main speech. The children, the next every 7 years, the new generation will be incrementing. Yishmu v'lamdu lira. They'll learn and hear and learn to fear. Et Hashem alechem kol yamim Hashem chayim al adama. That they should always have this fear of God in them, this fear and awe of God. So I'm just showing you that this theme of Yira, of Har Sinai, one of the key things you remember, there's this theme for Shavuot, which we just had exactly a week ago. The idea of remembering Har Sinai is not just the laws we received, but especially the awe. Okay, now let's get back to the speech. Oh, we're running out of time. Okay, let's get back to the speech, and I get getting sidetracked. Now comes the key point. So God says, great idea. Listen what God tells Moshe now. Lech emor lahem, shuvu lachem lo alechem. Go tell the people, go back to your tents. Famous line. God tells Moshe, tell the people, okay, you had this one-day experience at Har Sinai, wonderful. Take a break. Go back. Vata po amori madi. God tells Moshe, you stay here with me. Remember, Moshe is telling the people the story of how these laws came about 40 years ago. So Moshe is telling the people the story of what happened between himself and HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Har Sinai. After the people complained and said, we don't want to hear directly from God, we want to hear through you. So he says, God tells Moshe, you stay here with me. But dabra elecha, I'm going to speak to you, listen carefully. Et kol ha-mitzvah v'chukim v'mishpatim. I'm going to tell you, God tells Moshe, the ha-mitzvah. Remember this phrase, ha-mitzvah? It's going to come up many times. Let me get rid of this 1 second. We have the word ha-mitzvah and the chukim mishpatim. We saw chukim mishpatim already. What's ha-mitzvah we'll have to deal with later on. Asher tzamdim, you have to teach them. Vasu ba'aretz asher anochi noten lehem l'rishta. Now we're getting already a hint of what these laws are about. there's going to be a set of laws that come with the 10 commandments that need to be kept as we enter the land of Israel and establish a nation. It's not just laws that relate to plowing the land and the fruit of the land, but it's laws of establishing a people in the land. How are we going to become a nation in the service of God in the land of Israel? These laws apply to establishing a nation in the land of Israel. And that's why they're going to have their own book. And that's why they're only going to be recorded in Chumash as we're about to enter the land. As we'll see, they were taught much earlier, but they're being recorded as they're being taught to the new generation who's going to fulfill them when they enter and conquer the land and set up the nation. So again, I'll read Pas Chaf Zayin again. Now, God tells Moshe, you stay here with me, and I'm going to speak to you. The mitzvah and chukim mishpatim that you have to teach them, and they'll keep in the land. That's the end of the story between Moshe and God. Now Moshe tells the people, these laws that God taught me to teach you, ushmartem lasot, make sure to keep them, to do them. Kasher tziva Hashem Elohechem etchem. See, remember again, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Elokechem, that Hashem, your God, has commanded you. Lo tasru yamin small, don't go left or right. Follow the ways of God. We'll talk about that phrase later on. Valachti b'drachav is a big theme in Sefer Devarim, emulating God and walking with God. We can spend a lot of time on that phrase. That's key to understanding not just Devarim, but also Judaism, like the concept of halacha. And why halacha is called halacha is based on this idea of lalechet b'derech Hashem. B'chol derech asher telechu. Again, halacha, remember it starts with Abram with lech lecha. And he talech lefanev yatamim. Again, we'll dedicate a whole shir to that later on. Leman tichyun, in order that you, again, as a people, not just you as the individual, but you as a people, that you will stay and it'll be good for you in the land. That you as a people will live for a long time in the land. I'll prove to you as we go on the shir. Arichut yamim in Sefer Devarim is arichut yamim in contrast to exile. If you want to stay as a people on the land and prosper as God's people, you have to keep his mitzvot. Okay. That was the introduction. The introduction is over. And now, based on the introduction, Moshe begins his speech. And what does he say? V'zot, which means what's coming up from now, from chapter 6 now through chapter 26, is exactly what? The mitzvah and chukim mishpatim are this commandment and the chukim mishpatim, asher tziva Hashem Elohechem, l'lamed echem lasot ba'aretz. This is exactly the laws that God taught me to teach you to keep in the land. Notice, let me just real quick do this annotate. And we'll do a quick, okay. Notice the same line here. Hukim mishpatim. What's coming up in the speech, the story he just told is the background to the speech. What's coming up in the speech, we'll see there's going to be a ha-mitzvah section. We'll get to that very soon. There's going to be one section of Sefer of the speech, which will be referred to explicitly as ha-mitzvah, the commandment, which will be loving God and fearing God. And that will be chapters 6 through 11. The two parshiyot of enveloped by the two parshiyot of Kriyat Shema, and there'll be from chapter 12 to 26 will be the Hukim Mishpatim section, and that's why this opening line, this story, and hence this opening line is going to introduce the whole speech. Again, which God commanded me, Hashem, our God, or your God, your covenantal partner, to teach you to keep in the land. Remember the opening line of the speech? I'll clear the drawings and move up. Remember the opening lines of the speech. What did Moshe say? Shema Yisrael El Ha Chukim HaMishpatim, keep these laws. And here's how they came about. Why he adds Ha-Mitzvah in the beginning, that we'll deal with as the speech continues. But what's coming up in the speech? The speech will include the Mitzvah, Chukim HaMishpatim, that God commanded me to teach you. Now, why are these laws so important? You have to keep them in a land which you're about to cross over now to inherit. And if you don't keep the laws, God won't help you inherit them. Leman, again, Tirat Hashem, so you learn to fear God, because fear and awe of God is key, which will inspire you to keep all of his laws that I'm commanding you and your children, your whole lives, in order that you stay in this land for a long time. It's not just for your generation, for all future generations. V'shamati Yisrael, v'shamarta lasot, listen and keep all these laws, so it's for your own good. So you multiply in this land. Kasher diber Hashem elei avotecha lach eretz zavat chalav udvash. If you want this land flowing of milk and honey, just like God promised you and promised your forefathers, if you want to be worthy of that land, you better keep these mitzvot. We'll deal with this idea of the land and keeping the mitzvot. We'll deal with that next week with Chet HaMraglim. Now, in light of this, Moshe now begins the speech the laws that he got on Har Sinai together with the 10 Commandments. And how does he restart now? Again, with Shema Yisrael. And again, Hashem Elokeinu, Asher Karatim Anu Brit B'chorev, Hashem, our covenant partner, who we made a covenant with at Har Sinai, he's the one and only God. And therefore, because these laws are so important, we'll see this is going to be ha-mitzvah, the mitzvah. All commandments might be created equal, but some are more equal than others. The commandment of loving God is going to be the most important commandment. Therefore, because these laws are part of a covenant, if you don't have the right attitude, it's not going to work. Therefore, the opening statement Moshe says is that, or God's telling Moshe to say, is that in this covenant, you have to love God. Hashem, your God, is something you have to love Him with. It's put your whole heart into it. Why the word nefesh? We'll talk about later on. But with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Now, look at the next line. What's this referring to? Well, when we study the speech, we'll see this is referring to all the laws now from here till chapter 26. Got it? These words that I'm commanding you today, for now from here to chapter 26, keep them on your heart. That doesn't mean to teach them. It means to repeat them. Shinun is to repeat over and over again, drill them. These laws of Sefer Devarim that came with the 10 Commandments require constant repetition. And hence, the book, and later Chazal, we're going to refer to the space as Mishneh Torah. Later, we'll see in the laws of the king has to write these laws down in a book, this Mishneh Torah, a Sefer. Meaning, the reason why the laws of Devarim are called Mishneh Torah is not because it's a repeat of the first 4 books, but rather it's a set of laws that are cardinal, that are key, and these laws require constant repetition, more than any other laws of Chumash. Dafka, the laws of Sefer Devarim, and hence the most important book of the Bible. That's exactly my title. The most misunderstood because it's not a review of the first 4 books. It's a separate set of laws that requires constant repetition, and it's the only laws that require constant repetition, and they're part of the covenant we made at Har Sinai. And therefore, these laws require constant repetition. And now you have to learn them, you have to teach them to your children. Speak about them 24/7. They surround you 24/7. And therefore, the laws of Sefer Devarim are Mishneh Torah. And we'll prove that, maybe not today's shir, in our upcoming shiurim. That's what the word Torah is going to refer to in Sefer Devarim. This Mishneh Torah, the set of laws that came with the 10 Commandments. And what they're coming to do, they're going to take the concept of the covenant of the 10 Commandments and apply it to day-to-day life as a nation in the land of Israel. That's what we'll see now. So let me just review. Basically, we're saying the laws of the main speech in Devarim are a detailed set of laws that come with the 10 Commandments. Moshe received them 40 years earlier. We'll see Moshe taught them numerous times. And in Sefer Devarim, he's going to teach them for the last time. When he taught them the first time, we're going to see very soon. And in 2 or 3 weeks from now, we're going to talk about where this belongs in Sefer Shemot. We're going to study this again and see exactly where in Sefer Shemot Moshe Rabbeinu receives these laws. Again, Sefer Shemot doesn't record the laws that Moshe received here, but tells the story of Moshe receiving these laws. And as he teaches these laws for the last time, he'll include commentary and rebuke, but the core laws are 40 years old, and they precede, what we'll see later on, the laws of Devarim precede the sin of the golden calf. And when we're going to find contradictions between the laws in Devarim and laws in maybe later in Shemot and Vayikra and Bamidbar, it's not because they're later, it's because they're earlier. But I want to show you is the core laws of Sefer Devarim are come with the 10 Commandments before Midot Rachamim. Now again, Moshe Rabbeinu is going to, as he teaches the laws, he's going to review events that happened over the 40 years. He's going to rebuke. But the core laws themselves are 40 years old, and they precede the sin of the golden calf, and they reflect the first luchot with Midot Adin. And we'll prove that as we study the book. Now let me clarify something before everyone gets confused. Now, the reader of Chumash hasn't seen them yet, but the people of Israel have heard them over and over again. In fact, that's going to be the opening line of the book. Let me stop my share here for a minute and go back to my Chumash, and then I'll take the chat in a second. If I go back to the opening line of the book, chapter 1, what do we have? Eila HaDvarim, as we'll see Ramban and Ibn Ezra are going to explain, is not referring to the first speech, it's referring to the main speech. Because Eila HaDvarim, this word Dvarim, is the exact same Devarim that we refer to in the Shema, but you had these are the laws. Rashi will give a different approach. I'm going to follow Ramban and Ibn Ezra. Rashi is going to claim the Devarim are the rebuke, which also makes sense. In fact, we'll see that there's truth to both interpretations. But at the simplest level, what's coming up now in the main speech in chapter 5, this is introduction to the main speech, Ramban and Ibn Ezra will say, these are the Devarim that we have to teach our children, but Moshe now is teaching the Jewish people in Ever Yarden, but Moshe also taught them earlier. He taught them earlier in the Midbar, he taught them in Yarava, he taught them between Suf and Paran, he taught them between Tofel and Lavan and Chetzer and Zahav. And the main time he taught these laws, remember how we were confused by Pasuk Bet? Now it makes perfect sense. When was the main time Moshe drilled these laws over and over again? On the 11-day journey from Har Sinai, from Chorev to Kadesh Barnea. What happened in Kadesh Barnea? In Kadesh Barnea, as we'll see next week's share, that's where we sent the spies. And what should have happened, in Kadesh Barnea, we should have entered the land of Israel, either with or without sending the spies, but had the spies come back and the report been good, and had the people agreed to conquer the land, then from Kadesh Barnea, we would have entered the land 39 years earlier. And therefore, 39 years ago was the last time Moshe drilled these laws over and over again, because they were about to enter the land of Israel. And therefore, on the 11-day journey, for night Seder, during that 11-day journey, what laws did Moshe teach? The laws of Sefer Devarim, because these laws require constant repetition, and they're laws about establishing a nation in the land. They're about to conquer the land, and they need to know these laws because these laws are super applicable as soon as you come into land, about setting a kingdom and setting up a central place of worship and having a judicial system and having a economic system, as we'll see. All of us are going to be about establishing a nation that's going to serve God as a people, not just as individuals. And we'll explain almost all the laws in Sefer Devarim, especially from chapter 12 to 26. And what the introductory line is saying, the speech that Moshe is giving now, 40 years later, is the same speech that he gave 40 years earlier in all these different places, especially as they were about to enter the land of Israel. That will explain why his opening speech will be why it's been 40 years and talk about the sin of the spies. Again, that'll be next week's share. And now in the 40th year, in the 11th month, a month before he dies, in the 11th month, Moshe tells Bnei Israel everything God commanded them. After we defeated Sichon and Og, it's time to teach the laws. And Moshe is going to begin the speech, with his, in chapter 1 through 4, with his introductory speech, which will be next week's topic. Hope that was clear. Now I think we didn't need any parshanim. We simply have to read the book itself. Chapter 5 explains the book perfectly. And therefore, the opening line of the book is exactly referring to what we saw in chapter 5. So in a nutshell, what is Sefer Devarim? Sefer Devarim is basically some 20 chapters of laws that Moshe received together with the 10 Commandments. We're going to try and prove later on, it's during the first 40 days on Har Sinai, but that's less critical for now. But what's important, there are a set of laws that come part and parcel with the 10 Commandments, and they're going to be part of fulfilling this covenant that we made at Har Sinai to be a nation serving God. Now, I want to just, one last point, which I'm going to tie this to our series that we did on Mamad Har Sinai. Remember I dedicated the whole series to that the main event we remembered a week ago on Shavuot wasn't that we received the Torah. It wasn't a gift, but it was an obligation. What was our covenant? Remember, Hashem Elokeinu Karatim Anu Brit B'Chorev, Hashem our God made a covenant with us at Har Sinai. That covenant was if we follow God's laws and keep his brit, that will make us his treasured nation. We'll be an Am Sekulam Mikol Amim. And if we keep them, we'll be a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. Remember, there'll be a nation representing God. Now, that's a wonderful idea, but I'm going to need a guidebook how to make that happen. How am I going to be not just individuals representing God, but a nation representing God? So in order to become a nation representing God, I need laws about how we act as a nation. Again, that's why we'll have the laws of our national leadership, the idea of a king. We'll have laws about our judicial system and the Supreme Court. We'll have laws about an economic system. We'll have laws about marriage laws. We'll have the national center. Again, we talked about our economy. We'll have laws about our marketplace. There's going to be laws about going to war, who goes to war, and when we go to war, and how we go to war. So it's not only laws about individual behavior, but it's primarily laws about our national behavior, how we act as a nation. And it's wonderful to be a nation serving God, but I need a guidebook that'll give principles about how we behave as a nation. And we're going to see how Sefer Devarim focuses exactly on that topic. And that's why these laws are so important. They need constant repetition. Just real quick, next week we have to see chapter 4 to prove this point. just the end of the speech, which we'll dedicate much more time to, the end of chapter 26, which you'll take my word for it, concludes the speech. Look at the end. Hayom hazeh, remember? That we say in Shema. This day, which is ending now in chapter 26, it's been a long day. Hashem is commanding you to keep these chukim in mishpatim, got that? And keep them with all your heart, with this ava. And then look at all these points from Har Sinai. You took upon yourself that Hashem will be your God. You'll follow his ways. You'll keep all of his laws. Lishmo b'kolo. These are all thematic points from Har Sinai. And God took upon himself that you'll be his Am Skula, like he told you in Har Sinai, to keep all of his laws and to make you in a leadership above the nations for God's glory and fame and renown. And that will make you a Goy Kadosh, and Am Kadosh, as he told you at Har Sinai. I did this way too quick. Again, we'll dedicate a whole shir to this conclusion. But you see from the beginning and end of the speech, these are laws. They're going to take the covenant we made at Har Sinai at a practical level and apply them to becoming a nation in the land of Israel. And therefore, if I want to understand what is Sefer Devarim, I think it's as simple as can be. It's the most important book of the Bible because it's the laws that are going to, at a practical level, are going to apply the concept of a nation in the service of God. They're going to guide our national behavior. They're going to be core principles. They come part and parcel with the Ten Commandments. Why Chumash doesn't record them as they're taught the first time in Sefer Shemot and saves them for when Moshe teaches them the last time? We dedicate a whole shir to that. That's the shir titled Why and Where the Books Belong in Sefer Shemot and why they're their separate book later on. But the people of Israel have heard these laws many times, but the reader of Chumash only hears them the first time here. They're a set of laws that needs constant repetition. It explains why we say Shema every day. Again, we'll dedicate a whole shir to the Shema and exactly what we say in Shema, what we don't say. But that was the introduction. I hope it's clear. That's why I think this understanding is simple and clear. It's right in the book. It's black and white. It's just read chapter 5. I don't see how anyone could even argue with that. It's black and white psukim. It's just analyze the speech. It's right there. And that's what I'm saying. It's terribly misunderstood, but it's the most important book of the Bible because it says it's the most important book of the Bible. These laws require constant repetition, and hence they're called Mishneh Torah. Just like Mishnah is called Mishnah because the Mishnah requires constant repetition. You have to learn Mishnah by rote. Mishnah for Lashon Shinun. And therefore, these are laws that need constant repetition. That's why we say the Shema every day. It reflects that idea. So I spoke way too fast. Let me check the chat real fast because my time is up. Okay, let's check the chat, make this bigger and see what I missed. Oh my gosh, okay. Okay, we did the Chabad, is 11 days, okay. Ruth, the question is, why did it take 40 years to make an 11-day journey? Okay, that's Drash, that's not Pshat. Okay, no, it's, the Drash is why this 11-day journey, it took 4 years to 11-day journey, that's not Pshat in the Psukim at all, as we'll see. We'll see next week, we'll see the Eben Ezra on the opening Psukim, maybe in 2 weeks. But it's a beautiful Drash that Rashi's saying, you know what? Rashi sees the opening lines as rebuke. And there is a lot of rebuke in the speech. He says, you know what, we could have done this 11 days and it's taken 40 years. That's a beautiful insight, but it's definitely not pshat, simple pshat of the psukim. Can you translate to English the titles of the 5 books? Chumash doesn't give titles to its books. Our custom is we call the books by the opening words, like we do Parshat Shavua. It's not the names of the Parshat Shavua are based on the opening line of the book, of the Parsha, not the theme of the Parsha. Now, the Greek names deal more with like Genesis is like the beginnings. We call Breshit because it's the first word of the book. Shmot is the first word of the book, not the topic of the book. Vayikra is the first word of the book, not the topic of the book. Chazal called Torat Kohanim. Same thing with Numbers. That it's not the first word of the book. We call it Bamidbar, the first word of the book. But the book's not about the desert. And Devarim, it's hard to call it things or words because that would be a strange name. But in Hebrew, it's just the first word of the book, the first significant word of the book. And why it's called Deuteronomy, ask your Greek when they gave out Greek names for the books. I guess it means understood as a second teaching. Now, what this tells some scholars, the purpose of liberation with follow Hashem's command is not simply freedom. A second. What this tells some scholars is that the purpose of liberation from Egypt. Oh yeah, that's the whole theme about the purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim was not just to be free. That's the universal theme of the story. But for ourselves, the purpose, God took us out of Egypt to be his people. Therefore, when we remember the Exodus, remember what not that he took us out, but why he took us out, how that obligates us to be his people. What's the base for assuming Moshe used Anochi and somehow debate? I'll give a whole share on that. Why I'm saying Moshe usually didn't say Anochi. Usually it's that's in the Ani Amarti Bahar Ben Arba'im Moshe. I was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. But when he says Anochi in the context of I'm teaching you laws, because he's representing God and God's laws in speech, I'm suggesting that's why he's saying Anochi. When we get to the second part of Kriyat Shema, we'll see that as well. Again, I didn't explain why. I'm just making that assumption today. Share. I'll try to prove it as we go through the book. Okay. Covenant is given historical place of commitment to best of his. So the context will always be okay. So the covenant again. What makes it meaningful is again, it wasn't only for that generation; it's for all generations because it's an eternal covenant, and that's the whole idea of the covenant that we're a nation representing God, and to fulfill that, we have to be around forever, and hence we have to teach these laws to our children. Part of being Jewish is keeping it going. Okay. Listen to Rabbi Weeder's about Tamei Mikra, okay? There was a whole series on that. It's from Rabbi Che. Okay. Rabbi wrote me he had to leave for 10 minutes. It's fine. And okay, someone started about leaving. Okay, you can everything's on tape. These are so they're more important. Are they hard to understand or implement? I'm not sure what iPad is asking. These laws require constant repetition. So they're more, I'm going to say more important, they're more day-to-day. They're not hard, I don't think they're harder to understand or implement. They're just key, like loving God and fearing God. We'll see which ones are important. Now again, maybe the actual fulfillment of the law might not be so important, like Iran Nidacha, but the principle behind the law I think is going to be important. As when I look at them as a whole, maybe not the specific law, but understanding the concept behind the law, I think that's what they become principles and not just technical laws that we have to follow. Okay, so they have been taught. Now, Moshe doesn't teach these laws. We'll see when we do the share on Sefer Shemot in Sefer Devarim, or where Sefer Devarim belongs in Sefer Shemot. Moshe received them before Chet Egel, but he doesn't teach them to people until after Chet Egel. We'll dedicate a whole share to that. The sources are in a PDF file. Oh, to be sent in PDF, which we did. Yeah, I can send you the. I can send everything in Word also if you want to play with the file. Rivka suggested sending him in a. I sent the sources.
We can only post it on the website as a PDF. We can't.
Okay, but I can give you a link to the. I can link it to the doc file if you want. That's not a problem. And there's lots of programs that take a PDF file and turn it into a Word file also. You are assuming that when laws were given, not in evidence, nor universally agreed by. I understand. You are assuming regarding when laws. I don't understand that question. Jay, you understand that one?
Yeah, I think the question is, they're saying you're making the assumption the laws were given early and Moshe revealed them later, where that's saying it's a machloket in Chazal, maybe the laws were given later. I think that's the question.
No, but I'll prove to you. And said when we do the shir, Moshe teaches them when he comes down with the second luchot. It's explicit. When Moshe comes down with the second luchot, he says he teaches all the laws he got on Har Sinai. That's a pasuk that's hard to disagree with. I'm not sure what argument in Chazal you're referring to, but the final form in Sefer Devarim is new. But as we study the laws, we'll see we have to differentiate between the core laws that he's teaching and the stories he embellishes and the rebuke he adds, and sometimes the interpretation he adds. But I have to differentiate between the core laws that were original and his additional, his add-ons in the speech. When you give a chazar, when you give a review, you always add a couple comments. Oh, remember this, remember that. You review things and you add things that happen in the meantime. But as we study this speech, we'll differentiate between laws that were given that were original and laws that and interpretation and rebuke that he adds in the speech. We'll have to clarify that when we go through the speech. Okay, lots of thank yous. And okay. Okay, very good. Ibn Ezra, correct. Mel is correct. I should say Ibn Ezra, not Ibn Ezra. Okay. Ibn Ezra is 100% correct. I'm just grew up in America, so I 100% right, and I just have an old habit of pronouncing it the wrong way.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please God, we'll see you next week. Just briefly, tomorrow is Rabbi Ari Shvat's last year in a series on religious Zionism. Very fascinating shir. That's tomorrow at 11. Mark Shapiro continues. He's almost finished his series on his book. Tomorrow night at 8:30. Then he's going to start a series on Shaul Lieberman. That's how we started. Our joke is
our shir ending is we get a left-wing government.
I'm sorry? Well,
Is
nothing.
Ari
We're,
Sharon
we're leaving that for now.
nothing to do with politics?
I'm sorry, we're not politics, not politics. Okay. And then on Tuesday, Rachel Sharansky Danziger is going to be starting her series on storytelling and the rise of kings. That will be an 8-part series. Wednesday at 11 a.m., Simi Peters will be starting a 12-part series on Sefer Yirmiyahu. And Thursday morning, Shuli Mishkin will be starting a 6-part series on Come and Walk the Land, the regions of Israel and their stories. Of course, we welcome everybody. If you have to register for those, unless you want to register as one thing you have on the website, you register for all programs at once. Or where you just, you don't want to register for each one individually, which, I mean, it's easy to do, but I understand that. And then we'll have our regular continuing shearing during the week. Also, Marty Lakshin on Pshat and Midreshet on Wednesday morning. Simi Peters will be at 1 p.m. I'm sorry, I may at 1 p.m. on Wednesdays. That's just that scheduling works better. 8 p.m. in Israel, and then we'll have the Parsha Shir Thursday night, my Pirkei Avot Shir Friday morning, Moshe Sokolov's Haftarah Shir on Wednesday. So we look forward to seeing you. Watch for the links and the emails. And yes, Mark is going to talk about the appendix before Shalomer. I'm just saying he has 2 or 3 weeks left till he finishes discussing, which tomorrow night is part 50 in this ongoing series on his correspondence with rabbinic figures. And then he's going to move on to what we've done, a couple hundred, different people over the last 11 years or so on the great rabbinic figures. And now he's going to move to Show Lieberman. That'll probably take, 7, 8, 9 weeks, however long it takes. And then we'll continue. Okay. The complete schedule, somebody just emailed me privately, is on our website. Just go to the website, hit programs, and we have, of course, our medical ethics seminar on July the 11th. I know that's a little ways off, but that's always unfortunately it's still online this year. Our 13th, our bar mitzvah year of medical ethics, that'll be Sunday, July the 11th. Okay, enough of that. And any questions, comments, please feel free to email me. And thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. And those who can make it, we'll see you tomorrow morning or other times during the week. Invite your friends, invite one friend to participate in Torah Motion. And that's the best advertising we have, is word of mouth, letting people know. That's the best form. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody. And Rabbi Leibtag, thank you very much. Have a good one. Now you can talk about the government, okay? If we're
no, I was just joking about Ari's Zionistic share ending with, time. It ends with
religious Zionism ends just
it's about to end. So
yeah, I'm not gonna. Yeah. We didn't discuss politics. Tomorrow's going to be talking about different things with Rav Reiner, with Soloveitchik, Rav Kook, different various approaches, but it has not been political at all. Like what Hebrew language last week, he spoke about Rav Kook on Korbanot, fascinating shir. It's not politics. It's the thought, the various approaches of many thinkers, and within the religious Zionist world, it's not a monolithic view. There are many views, and so it's well worth hearing. Okay, everybody.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Rabbi, have a good one. Bye-bye.